first thing on the list of harams are eating carrion, blood, or pork meat. The Quran is very clear about which meats are acceptable for consumption and which meats are considered sinful if eaten. It is a commonly known fact that followers of Islam must not eat pork products or meat that is still bloody and has not been thoroughly cooked. It is also forbidden to eat carrion, or decaying flesh of dead animals. Any meat that is consumed must also be halal, meaning the meat has been slaughtered and prepared as prescribed by Muslim law. Now, I found it very interesting that the Quran does mention that if one is in a state of starvation and has absolutely no choice but to eat these meats out of pure desperation and survival, that Allah is forgiving and merciful. In Surah 16, Ayah 115, the Holy Quran states that Allah has forbidden you only carrion and blood and the flesh of swine, also any animal over which the name of any other than Allah has been pronounced. But whoever eats of them under compelling necessity, neither desiring it nor exceeding the limit of absolute necessity, surely for such action Allah is much forgiving and most merciful. Alright, moving on to talking about the making of statues and pictures. Allah describes himself as the Almighty and original creator through titles such as Al-Khaliq, the creator of everything out of nothingness, and Al-Fatir, the bringer into existence, giving every living thing its particular nature, objective, and meaning. Now, there are many hadiths that discuss the sin of producing statues and pictures to imitate human form. These hadiths state that the image makers are cursed. They are called some of the most evil creations. They will be most severely punished on the Day of Judgment, and they will be punished until they breathe life into their creations. However, they will never be able to do that, and the angels will not enter houses in which there are statues. It is also believed that if a person, or an artist, really wanted to depict or create the essence of a human being by means of either painting or sculpture, he will then have encroached upon the rights and authority that belong to only Allah. And it is believed that those who compete with Allah in creation will receive the greatest punishment on the Day of Judgment, for that is a blasphemous act. Let's talk about marital relations. So there is some discussion about a wife refusing to engage in marital relations with her husband. On the basis of the following hadith, it is generally understood that if a wife refuses relations with her husband, she will be cursed by the angel. Abu Huraira reports from the Prophet that when a husband calls his wife to bed and she refuses, and as a result the husband spends the night in anger, then angels curse the wife all night until dawn. Bukhari. Interestingly, in Islam, it is believed that a husband and wife protect the chastity of one another by providing one another a legitimate means of satisfying their physical urges. This protection of chastity is essential for the preservation of the family unit. Hence, anything which puts chastity in jeopardy is disliked by the Almighty. However, it's important to mention that the basis of refusal by the husband or wife must also be taken into consideration. For example, if either of them is tired, sick, or simply not in the proper mood and in the appropriate frame of mind, then it certainly does not entail any wrath of the Almighty. It is only when a spouse starts to deliberately evade such natural needs of the other that the attitude becomes questionable. Fact number 7, the sin of spying and eavesdropping on others' private conversations. So according to Islam, it is not permissible to engage in namimah, which is malicious gossip, and spying on private conversations. Namimah is considered a major sin as it involves sharing what others have said in order to cause trouble among them. The definition of namimah is also uncovering secrets and disclosing that which is not appropriate to disclose. Hence, followers of Islam should keep silent and refrain from telling everything that they see of people's situations, unless speaking of it will bring some benefit to a Muslim or to ward off some harm. This can be seen in the Quran, Surah 49, Ayah 12, where it is said, "O ye who believe, avoid suspicion as much as possible. For suspicion in some cases is a sin, and spy not on each other behind their backs. Would any of you like to eat the flesh of his dead brother? Nay, ye would abhor it. But fear Allah, for Allah is oft returning most merciful." It is also narrated in Al-Sahihain from Abu Huraira that the Prophet said, "Beware of suspicion, for suspicion is the falsest of speech. Do not eavesdrop, do not spy on one another, do not envy one another, do not forsake one another, do not hate one another. Be, O slaves of Allah, brothers." Al-Bukhari. Next, we'll be talking about the sin of women appearing like men and vice versa. So according to Islam, Allah's curse is upon women who appear like men and upon men who appear like women. In his book, Lawful and the Prohibited in Islam, Yusuf al-Qaradawi, the prominent religious scholar, writes, "The Prophet declared that a woman should not wear a man's clothing or vice versa. He cursed men who imitate women and women who imitate men. Furthermore, the evil of such conduct, which affects both the life of the individual and that of the society, is that it constitutes a rebellion against the natural order of things. According to this natural order, there are men and there are women, and each of the two sexes has its own distinctive characteristics. However, if men become effeminate and women masculinized, this natural order will be reversed and will disintegrate. It is believed that among those who are cursed by Allah and his angels, both in this world and in the hereafter, the Prophet has mentioned that a man whom Allah has created as male, but who becomes effeminate by imitating women, and a woman whom Allah has created as female, but who becomes masculinized by imitating men. For this reason, the Prophet forbade men from wearing clothes or things pertaining to women. Fact number 5 brings us to talk about the sin of ending your own life. Now, as is common in many religions, ending one's own life is seen as a great sin. Allah does not permit his believers to intentionally end their own lives in any way. This can be seen through verses of the Holy Quran and Hadith. In Surah 6, Ayah 151, Allah says, "And do not kill the soul which Allah has forbidden to be killed, except by legal right. This He has instructed you that you may use reason." In Surah 4, Ayah 29, Allah says, "Nor kill yourselves, for verily Allah has been to you most merciful. If any do that in rancor and injustice, soon we shall cast them into the fire, and it is easy for Allah to do so." So essentially, Islam advises that life does not belong to us like property. Rather, it is granted to every human being as a trust. Neither is it allowable for a person to take another human's life without justification, nor is it permissible for one in Islam to destroy their own existence. God has declared both of these actions as grave sins. Let's take a look at some of the habits that are forbidden in Islam, such as drinking alcoholic beverages and gambling. Now, Islam does not permit believers to engage in behaviors such as drinking alcohol and gambling, as they are deemed to be sinful acts. The Holy Quran states that, "For those who engage in these activities, in them is a great sin, and some profit for men, but the sin is greater than the profit." It also mentions that, "O ye who believe, intoxicants and gambling, stones and arrows are an abomination of Satan's handiwork. Abstain such that you may prosper. Satan's plan is to excite hatred between you with intoxicants and gambling, and to hinder you from the remembrance of Allah, and from prayer will you not then abstain." Fact number 3, the sin of committing adultery or fornication. Now, chastity is defined as controlling oneself from forbidden desires due to the love of Allah the Almighty in response to His command, as well as for seeking His reward in return. Islam has always supported the idea of chaste living and has thus legislated many laws that reduce the strong impact of these desires and control them. It has also encouraged remaining on the straight path and warned against giving into unlawful desires of the flesh. Fornication and adultery are forbidden and classified as major and destructive sins. Islam has even forbidden everything that could lead to these sins, such as immoral exchanges of looks between two sexes, depraved words, seductive moves, an unmarried and unrelated man and a woman being in a room alone together, and anything else which could lead to sin. In Surah 17, Ayah 32, Allah the Almighty says what means, "And come not near to unlawful sex, Verily, it is a great sin and an evil way that leads to hell unless forgiven by Allah. This opens the road for other evils. When a man commits adultery, faith comes out of his heart and hovers above him until he leaves the sin. Then faith comes back to him again. All right, let's talk a little bit about the sin of not performing prayer. So, salat, or prayer, is the most important practice in Islam because it is daily worship. Since the Arabic word salat is rooted in the word silat, which means connection or contact, the best translation for salat is contact prayer. Like other religious duties, the contact prayers are a gift from God. It is believed that souls need nourishment just like the body needs nourishment from food. Without nourishment, souls will not grow and develop. It is believed that the 5 contact prayers are like meals for the soul. They are spread throughout the day, like meals for the body, and consist of dawn, noon, afternoon, sunset, and nighttime prayer. Those who do not develop their soul cannot be close to God because they will not be able to stand His immense energy. Thus, they will end up astray away from God. Now, there are several passages in the Quran that address the importance of daily prayer. In Surah 19, Ayah 59, the Quran mentions that then there has succeeded them a posterity who has given up prayers and followed lusts. So they will be thrown in hell, except those who repent. And bringing us down to our fact number 1, an action of sin is not fasting on a day of Ramadan without proper excuse. Fasting during Ramadan is one of the pillars of Islam, and it is not permissible for a Muslim to fail to fast it except without a reasonable excuse. Whoever fails to fast during Ramadan or breaks the fast during this time for a legitimate excuse such as sickness, travel, or pregnancy is required to make up the days that they did not fast. As for one who does not fast the month of Ramadan deliberately out of heedlessness, even if that is just one day of the month in the sense of that he does not intend to fast it at all, or he breaks the fast after having started to fast with no excuse, he has committed a major sin and must repent. Surah 2, Ayah 183 mentions, "O you who have believed, decreed upon you is fasting, as it was decreed upon those before you, that you may become righteous." With the above verse, the Holy Quran makes it very clear that fasting was ordained compulsory on all Muslims and that they have to fast if they are to stay righteous.
Starting at number 10, we have the food Jello. Now this is a very common dessert. Who doesn't like Jello, right? It tastes really nice, especially when it's chilled. Kids love it especially. But here's the thing though. It's known that Jello contains gelatin, which is a protein derived from the collagen that is found in pig bones, skin, as well as connective tissues. So this tasty little dessert isn't so halal after all. This may come as a surprise. At number 9, red candy. So red candy or strawberry flavored candy, anything red that tastes sweet, pretty much in the candy category. It's often dyed with a food coloring called carmine, and carmine is made from dead crushed up beetles. It's produced when these insects are boiled with sodium carbonate or ammonia, which then produces the bright red dye. Therefore, it's recommended that you see the ingredients list before buying. Also, a thing to note, of the 4 major Sunni Islamic schools of thought, Hanafi schools, they forbid eating all bugs, while the Maliki scholars, they accept them, but the Shafi'i and the Hanbali academics, they completely forbid the consumption of some insects, but others they allow. So it's haram based on the school of thought that you fall in. Next up, Japanese food. Well, if you're worried about following the halal guidelines, then it would be beneficial for you to check the ingredients of food that you're ordering in a restaurant or buying at the store, of course. Many of these Japanese foods, they use soy sauce and it contains alcohol. Other haram ingredients include mirin, and this is a type of rice wine similar to sake, but it has lower alcohol content, but there's still alcohol in it. Instant fried tofu comes in at number 7. Tofu is often used as a meat substitute for vegans and vegetarians. I was vegetarian for about 6 years, and tofu was like my staple food in the diet. Because tofu is a very flexible food. Often though, Chinese brands, they do sell pre-cooked frozen tofu, and that tofu is fried in pork fat in order to retain its crispiness. So regardless of whether you're looking for halal foods as a Muslim, or if you're vegan or vegetarian looking to stay away from animal products altogether, just always double check what is used to prepare your tofu. Number 6 brings us cheese fondue. I'm a person where I love cheese, and we can thank Switzerland for this. So traditional cheese fondue is a Swiss dish that makes use of white wine or alcohol. So with that said, it's a haram food item. Moving on to number 5, we have spirit vinegar. Alcohol and products containing alcohol are just haram in Islam. And even if the alcohol has evaporated in the end, so therefore spirit vinegar is haram. However, if alcohol is not used in making of the vinegar, then it is halal. So it's advised that you check the description of the ingredients before buying it, just to make sure. Marshmallows comes in at number 4. Marshmallows, they are a very popular snack, and you can eat marshmallows just as they are, or you can throw them in your hot chocolate, you can roast them at a campfire and more. But again, just like Jell-O, marshmallows contain gelatin, so they are completely haram. However, vegan marshmallows, they do exist, so you are in luck. You can check them out. Those are fully halal and they're a great substitute for regular marshmallows. One of my favorite desserts comes at number 3, cheesecake. Most cheesecakes contain gelatin as a firming agent to set the cheese, but you can find cheesecakes that do not contain any gelatin though. But if you are unsure, it is recommended that you simply make it yourself, or you have somebody that's a lot more skilled than you in the kitchen make it. I'm very picky when it comes to my cheesecake, so you gotta make it right or else I'm just not eating it. Cake mix is at number 2. Although they can be very affordable and tasty, some ready-made cake mixes, they actually use pork fat. So of course, make sure you check the ingredients list before buying one. And the final surprisingly haram food, salad dressing. Have you ever wondered why there's certain salad dressings that are made in-house at a restaurant and you find that they taste a little bit different than the ones that you can buy in the store or even ones that you make at home? Well, I got the answer to that. It's because many restaurants use bacon fat in their salad dressings. So of course, when you go to a restaurant, you can ask for an ingredients list or just tell them not to put any dressing on your salad whatsoever. Another option is if you take the salad to go, I guess, you can put some olive oil over it, or even just plain olives. They have a great flavor, especially when you use them as a topping for salad. Well, let's just jump right in. Starting at number 10, we have mistreating your wife. So mistreating your spouse is one of the biggest sins and it's considered haram in Islam. Now, the Prophet Muhammad, he taught people that they need to be very friendly and kind to their wives. According to Muslim belief, Prophet Muhammad even stated that you need to try to make your spouse your best friend. In a hadith narrated by Al-Tirmidhi, it says, the Prophet said, the best of you are those who are the best to their wives, and I am the best of you to my wives. The next thing considered haram in Islam is tattoos. Now, there's a hadith that says this: may Allah curse the women who do tattoos and those from whom tattoos are done, those who pluck their eyebrows and those who file their teeth for the purpose of beautification and alter the creation of Allah. Specifically, that's found in Al-Bukhari Al-Libas, number 5587. Charging interest is at number 8, and the term riba refers to interest, and this is something that is completely haram in Islam, largely due to the fact that it makes poor people even poorer. So like if you owe money and you're charged interest, in the end, you end up poor because you end up spending more money than you actually owed. Now, in the hadith from Abdullah ibn Hamzallah, this is what is recorded that the Prophet Muhammad had said. The Prophet said, a dirham or riba which a man receives knowingly is worse than committing adultery 36 times. And you know, debt payments is what kills a lot of people, because if you owe $20,000 with interest, you probably owe closer to $25,000, $30,000 in some cases. Next time I gotta pay off a car loan or something, I'm gonna tell them, listen man, you're charging interest on that, that's haram. Adultery and fornication come in at number 7. Now there's a passage in the Quran, Surah 17 verses 32 that says this, "And do not approach unlawful sexual intercourse, indeed it is ever an immorality and is evil as a way." So of course, having relations outside of your marriage, as well as having intimate relations not being married, that's haram. Drinking alcohol is another big haram thing in Islam, and is found in the Quran, Surah 5 verses 90. There's a passage that says this, "O you who have believed, indeed intoxicants, gambling, sacrifices on stone altars to other than Allah, and divining arrows are but defilement from the work of Satan. So avoid it that you may also be successful." Now moving on to number 5, slaughtering animals the wrong way. This is also haram. So if a Muslim is slaughtering an animal without saying Allah's name, it'll be considered haram. A person should say Bismillah Allahu Akbar. Also, this is what the Quran has to say in Surah 6 verses 121. "Eat not, O believers, of that meat on which Allah's name has not been pronounced at the time of slaughtering of the animal, for it is fisq, which is a sin." Most of you, even if you're not Muslim, probably knew this already. Eating pork, that is haram. Even if you use Allah's name during the slaughtering of a pig, eating pork is still going to be haram. Surah 5 verses 3 says this, "Prohibited to you are dead animals, blood, the flesh of swine, and that which has been dedicated to other than Allah, and those animals killed by strangling, or by a violent blow, or by a headlong fall, or by the goring of horns, and those from which a wild animal has eaten, except what you are able to slaughter before its death, and those which are sacrificed of stone altars. And prohibited is that you seek decision through divining arrows." That is grave disobedience. This day those who believe have despaired of defeating your religion. So fear them not, but fear me, the day I have perfected for you your religion and completed my favor upon you, and have approved for you Islam as religion. But whoever is forced by severe hunger with no inclination to sin, then indeed Allah is forgiving and merciful. So yeah, very long passage that included the point that eating pork is haram in Islam. In number 3, we have suicide. In the hadith, specifically Bukhari Janaiz 84, it says, "He who commits suicide by throttling shall keep on throttling himself in the hellfire forever. And he who commits suicide by stabbing himself shall keep on stabbing himself in the hellfire." Number 2, a very big haram thing, making statues and pictures, especially when it comes to prophets of Islam. Now in the hadith narrated by Abdullah ibn Umar, this is what it says. Allah's messenger said, "Those who make these images will be punished on the day of resurrection, and it will be said to them, make alive what you have created." And finally, most Muslims would agree on this, that shirk is the biggest haram thing in the religion of Islam. Shirk refers to associating partners with Allah, and this is the most serious thing. It's said that the Prophet Muhammad said these words, "Shall I not tell you of the most serious of the major sins?" We said, "Of course, O Messenger of Allah." He said, "Associating anything in worship with Allah." Also, there's a verse in the Quran, Surah 4 verses 48, and this is what it has to say. "Indeed, Allah does not forgive association with him, but he forgives what is less than that for him who he wills. And he who associates others with Allah has certainly fabricated a tremendous sin." So in the religion of Islam, only Allah can be seen or viewed or worshipped in the position of Allah. Nobody else or nothing else can be compared. At number 10, we have zina. Zina is also known as adultery, and it's strictly prohibited in Islam. It also includes intimate intercourse with the mutual consent of 2 unmarried men and a woman. It's mentioned specifically in the Quran in Surah 17 verses 32 the following, "Nor come nigh to fornication and adultery, for it is a shameful deed and an evil, opening the road to other evils." Number 9 leads us marriage proposals. Okay, so if we talk about marriage proposals, then it is considered haram for a Muslim man to propose to a divorced or widowed woman during Iddah. And Iddah is actually what's known as a waiting period for a woman after either getting divorced or the passing away of her husband, in which she is not allowed to marry again. and there's some reasons behind this. I'm not going to get into that in this episode, but for now, the man can express his desires for marriage, but cannot make a formal proposal. A Muslim man is also not allowed to propose to a woman who is married to another man. While we're on the topic of marriage, let's look at number 8, marrying a non-Muslim. Well, this rule does not apply to Muslim men because they are allowed to marry non-Muslim women, and there are some rules around that. But while talking about women in marriage between a Muslim woman and a non-Muslim man, well, that is considered haram. This is because the man is considered the head of the household in Islam, and he's the one who supports the family, and the man is responsible for his wife. Muslims do not believe in giving women into the hands of those who do not practice Islam and having them be responsible for Muslim women because they are not concerned with protecting the rights of the religion. So therefore, in Islam, a Muslim man can marry a non-Muslim woman, and there are some guidelines around that, but a Muslim woman cannot marry a non-Muslim man. Number 7 is about inheritance. It is considered completely haram for a father to deprive his children of inheritance. It is also haram for a father to deprive the woman or children of a wife who is not favorable to him of an inheritance. Additionally, it is haram for one relative to deprive another relative of their inheritance through tricks. The haram thing coming in at number 6 is about business ethics. So let's talk about riba, which is an excessive addition above the principal, such as usury or interest. That is completely prohibited in all forms in Islam. This interest actually contradicts the Islamic principle of zakat, which allows wealth to flow from the rich to the poor. Riba is forbidden because it keeps wealth in the hands of the wealthy and it keeps it out of the hands of the poor. Riba is also thought to make people selfish and greedy. Just imagine, you're trying to pay down your debts and you're charged for the process of paying down your debts. So Islam says it's completely prohibited. Also, business and trade practices that don't practice free and fair exchange of goods and services is considered haram. No bribery, no stealing, no gambling or anything like that. Therefore, all forms of deceit and dishonesty in business are also prohibited completely in Islam. Moving on now to number 5. Let's talk about apparel, like clothing and jewelry. There's a whole lot here to unpack. Both gold adornments as well as silk clothes are forbidden for men to wear in Islam, but they're actually permitted for women, but only as long as they are not used to sexually attract men that are not their husband. The prohibition of these adornments are part of a broader Islamic principle of abstaining from lavish, excessive lifestyles. Clothing that does not properly cover the body and clothing that is transparent are both considered haram for both men and women. And furthermore, Islam forbids excessive beautification, which includes altering one's physical appearance with things like tattoos, tooth shortening and tooth filing and all of that stuff, as well as cosmetic surgery, and the list goes on. Also, did you know that hunting during pilgrimage is haram? Yes, it is completely forbidden to hunt while performing a pilgrimage. As a matter of fact, there's a passage in the Quran that goes like this: "Believers, rejoice, complete your indentures, except for what is announced to you here. The beast of the cattle is made lawful for you for food, while the game is prohibited when you are on pilgrimage. Lo, God ordains whatever pleases him." And that reference is from the Quran, Surah 5, verses 1. Number 3 leads us to the haram thing involving carrion. Carrion is an animal that is not slaughtered in the name of Allah, but instead passes away by itself, and it is also prohibited in Islam. Forbidden to you is that which dies of itself, and blood and flesh of swine, and that on which any other name than that of Allah has been invoked, and the strangled animal, and that beaten to death, and that killed by a fall, and that killed by being smitten with the horn, and that which wild beasts have eaten, except what you slaughter. And that reference is in the Quran, Surah 5, verses 3. The haram thing at number 2 is intoxicants. Alcoholic drinks are generally prohibited completely in Islam, with the Quran including several verses that rebuke the consumption of khamr, which is an Arabic term meaning intoxicants that are interpreted to include most forms of alcohol and psychoactive drugs. The Quran says, they question you about intoxicants and games of chance. Both have great sin and some utility for men, but their sin outweighs their utility. And they ask you what they ought to spend. That which is superfluous, thus God reveals his revelations to you so that you may reflect. And that reference is from the Quran, Surah 2, verses 219. Ending this episode off at number 1, shirk. Okay, so the biggest haram thing in Islam is attributing the features of Allah to anyone or anything else. The Quran stresses in many verses that God does not share his powers with any partner. It warns those who believe their idols will intercede for them, that they, together with the idols, will become fuel for hellfire on the day of judgment. And that's taken from the Quran, Surah 21, verses 98. As well as the great majority of the polytheists, those who worship multiple gods in the Prophet Muhammad's time, were those who had never become Muslims. Thus, the words of the Quran were not addressed to Muslims, but rather they were addressed to non-Muslim Arabs. But yeah, associating any sort of attributes to other than Allah, completely restricted and forbidden and haram according to the religion of Islam.